Good evening, good evening. Happy Black History Month. It still is and forever will be. Yes, so I am your Mayor Barbara Foushee, and welcome to our annual Black History Month speaker series. We were poised to have a dynamic duo, but one of our speakers fell ill with the flu and was unable to be here, but we do have Mr. Maurice Green with us this evening, and we do hope that you'll leave this space armed with more knowledge about Black people and their continuing contributions to our society. And so I don't know how everyone is feeling. I feel a little unsteady. You know, I feel like we're in these really weird, unprecedented times, and we're absorbing a lot of news. We're being faced with a flurry of things most days, the last couple of weeks. I know for me, and I want to encourage you to seek normalcy every day. Just get up and do the things you normally do. Spend time with your family and friends, and certainly practice more self-care, regardless of what that looks like, whether it's riding your bike or running in the woods, or, you know, it's hard to catch a moving target. And literally, I feel like that's what's been happening the last couple of weeks as the flurry of executive orders have flowed from Washington, D.C. And so we're going to catch our breath tonight and be together in community and talk a little bit about Black history. So we know that Black history is American history. The narrative of Black people in the United States reveals more about who we are as a country. We have a very difficult past, our painstaking movements forward towards justice, and our very persistent racial wounds that we refuse to heal. I do want to shout out our amazing Parks and Recreation Department and other town staff for organizing and executing this program and other events throughout the year. Parks and Rec, they are our programming folks, and they just do a really, really great job. So if we could just give them a round of applause for what they do. For those of you that don't know our town manager, she is sitting on the front row. Ms. Patrice Toney is with us this evening to enjoy this program. And so I'm going to get out of the way, and let's just take care of ourselves and take care of each other during these unsteady and unprecedented times. I would like to present to you community member, Mr. James Williams. He is the MC for this evening, and he has also been instrumental in event planning for Black History Month down through the years. Mr. James Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Foushee. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. This is Black History Month, and this is February 3rd, and I want us to give some thought to, and I know the main theme is African American labor, but it's so rich when we think about history and Black history and our people is so much. And so it's a challenge to kind of narrow it down and do kind of a snippet. But that's what, I know you can't be here all night, so that's what we're gonna do. But I do want to mention, I mentioned this is February 3rd, but this year, 2025, this is the 60-year anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so I think, I do want to make reference to that. And I think about that as we think about, for instance, Griffin versus Board of Education and what is happening, what is unfolding currently as people try to steal an election. but that's not new. That's a part of our history also. But I also want to think about, a couple of days ago was February 1. And quite often when we think about February 1, in fact, there's a documentary called February 1, related to the Greensboro Four and the sit-in movement that started, well, really, I don't know if it's fair to say it actually, well, it got its impetus when those four A&T students, sat in at Woolworths in Greensboro, and that prompted the sit-in movement and eventually SNCC and a number of other things. But also, we can think about February 1, and we think about February 1 of 1965. Here again, we're talking 60 years ago. And what was happening? One thing that was happening was that Dr. King was in Selma. They were demonstrating and marching for voting rights. And on February 1, Dr. King and 200 other people were arrested in Selma. And ultimately, leading to Bloody Sunday, and Bloody Sunday helping to propel Lyndon Johnson and others to move forward on the Voting Rights Act. But today is February 3rd. And there's something significant about February 3rd as it relates to Black people, as it relates to the furthering of this quest for democracy and equality in this country. And that is on February 1, 155 years ago, February 1, 1870, the 15th Amendment of the Constitution was ratified. So all of these things in February that I just wanted to kind of lay out there. Now, the theme for Black History Month, and I was looking forward to introducing Dr. Professor Ajamu Dillahunt Holloway. He's a young professor at North Carolina State University. I've known him since he was a youth. I met him through his grandparents. His grandfather is also named Ajamu Dillahunt. And Ajamu, his grandfather and grandmother and others were very instrumental in advocating for Black workers and worker rights. They helped form the Black Workers for Justice. I mean, this outfit is known across the nation, and Gaza Laughing House and his wife and others have done organizing and worked to protect and promote worker rights for Black people for decades. And Dr. Dillahunt was brought up in that environment. In fact, a lot of his work and research is based upon, that information, that data, that work that Black workers for. So I was really looking forward to introducing this young brother, this young scholar who inspires me. But he can't be with us this evening. So what that does, I hadn't planned to say too much, but there are a couple of things I do want to say in light of the fact that we do have a little extra time because he's not here. I didn't prepare a speech or anything, but you give a lawyer a mic, they can talk a little bit, but I'm not going to go on. But certain things come to mind. Yesterday, was Sunday, and sometimes, Sunday morning I get up and I listen to some gospel music, and I was listening to, Aretha Franklin's, famous gospel CD, the one, and one of my favorite, well, I love Precious Memories, but I love the way she did it best of all. And I was listening to it, and I'm thinking, precious memories. And I'm thinking history. And I'm thinking memories that are precious to me, just in terms of my background. And when we think of precious memories, I know quite often we think of pleasant things, but precious memories don't have to always be pleasant, feel-good memories. They're memories that are precious, that might even be painful or disturbing, but they are a part of who you are and what made you. And they're precious. And I was thinking about, and it's particularly as it relates to this theme of African Americans and labor. I was thinking about, and so bear with me, sometimes I get a little emotional, but I've learned to be okay with that. So I grew up in that era where men ain't supposed to show emotion, but that's deadly. I mean, sometimes it has to come out, okay? But I'm thinking about my dad and as a youth, and we're living on Water Street in Plymouth, and my dad worked at this enterprise, this business called Georgia Pacific. And he would get up really early and be on the job. My mom would get up a little later, fix his lunch, and when we were living at that particular location that I'm talking about, before I went to school, I would take my dad's lunch to him on the job. And I don't know, most of you may be too young, but he didn't have a fancy lunch bucket. There was a pail. I mean, they used to make lard, and you could buy it in a pail. It had a handle, and quite often his lunch would be in that pail. And I would take the railroad track and walk down to Georgia Pacific and take him his lunch. It took me about maybe 15 minutes there, 15 minutes back, a little less. And when I get there, I would see my dad, and he would be on this huge pile of logs, and he would have these tongs, and what he would do would be to connect those tongs to the logs, and then the crane operator would lift the logs off the barge, and then they would take them to the mill where they would be whatever processed. And I was terrified because those logs, they could fall on my dad, they could crush him, but that's what he did. And I didn't know until later that that was really all they would allow him to do. Ultimately they did let him operate the crane, but that was many years later. But that was the world that we were in. There were positions that were reserved for white folk, and there were positions that black people were forced to take if they wanted to work. And so he worked at Georgia Pacific, and a lot of this I didn't find out. I mean, he didn't tell me all of this. Some of his friends told me later. For several decades, at least 30 years. And when they would bring on a young white person, they wanted to hire a supervisor, a boss, guess who would they get to train that person? They would get my dad. That was the world. That was what we were relegated to. My mom, we're talking about labor now, my mom, there weren't a lot of women or men, black women or men in Plymouth at that time who had a high school education. My mom graduated from high school. She was smart. She was sociable. She was kind. She was caring. But the only job she could get was help cleaning white folks' houses, taking care of their kids. But I say that, and it's not easy to talk about, but I say it kind of with pride in the sense that what she was able to do with that, laying a foundation for a family and encouraging and inspiring her children to go to the next level, despite it all. And so it wasn't easy. That's when we think about African Americans and labor, and I think about that, and it was some years later, in fact, about 8 or 10 years later, that I came upon a book. I mean, we know about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and a lot of this didn't change until that act was passed. But it didn't happen automatically. People had to fight. People had to stand up. People had to go to court. People had to litigate. And it's not necessarily an easy thing when you're living in a small town where white supremacy reigns supreme and you're going to challenge the system. But, what I found out after law school, like I said, maybe a decade ago, I didn't know that there was a lawsuit right there in my hometown of Plymouth where black men sued Weyerhaeuser, which was the other major logging enterprise in Plymouth. There was a lawsuit in 1979, and when I was reading about that case and the names, some of the names of people were people that I knew. I mean, they were, of course, much older. Some of them, I knew their kids much better. People like Henry Armstead. I went to school with his son. One of them was older. Samuel Moore. Emmanuel Small. Emmanuel Small Jr. was a classmate of mine. I knew him quite well. Samuel Robertson. Samuel Robertson was the father of my wife's husband, whose name was Sammy also. He's now deceased. But these are some of the people who were involved in that litigation, and the very things that were being litigated was some of the things that I talked about in terms of my dad, how those men could never move beyond a certain level. They had to do the grit work, the dirt work. They had segregated cafeterias and bathrooms and that sort of thing. And so they sued and they prevailed, and that began to change over time. But it took that courage, it took that zeal, it took that sense of knowing that we can and we must do better. And then I think about, a couple of weeks ago, it's Dr. King's holiday. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is Dr. King was very much dedicated to the importance of unions and worker rights and the importance of working with, workers and unions to move forward the whole civil rights effort. And of course, we know that, when he was in Memphis, that's why he was there because of the sanitation workers. And I think about his speech and all labor has dignity, and how that is something that is not sufficiently appreciated even to this day. And I wondered how many of the speakers who spoke on Dr. King's Day really drew that connection, especially given that this Black History Month is about African Americans and labor. So those, there are a few other things that kind of came to my mind, but those are some of the things that kind of resonated with me as I started thinking about this evening. I mean, since Ajamu wasn't going to be here, and I wasn't even sure I was going to come, but I have been, working with Parks and Rec for several years, and I talked to my friend Karina. Karina said, "James, I know you're going to be here," and I was like, "Karina, yeah, if you want me here, I will be here. I don't know what I'm going to say," because I thought my main purpose was introducing Ajamu and making a few comments, but but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over now back to the mayor, who will introduce our speaker for the evening.
All right. So we appreciate Mr. Williams always for his comments are always timely and relevant, and he stood right in for Ajamu, who is ill and could not join us this evening, so thank you so much. Mo Green, Maurice Mo Green, he asked me, he said, you don't have to read all that. That's what he told me. So we're word on the street. That's what they say. But I will highlight some of his resume and you know, make space for him to come before us. So Maurice Mo Green's vision for North Carolina public schools can be summed up in 3 words: achieving educational excellence. The son of a special education teacher, Green is a lifelong champion of public education and has seen firsthand its ability to transform both lives and communities. As North Carolina's State Superintendent of Public Instruction, I love saying that. He is committed to ensuring all students in public schools have access to a high-quality education. He strongly champions greater support and resources for public education, striving to create a brighter future for students, for educators, and communities across our state. After doing 2 United States judicial clerkships and working as a lawyer in private practice, Green served as general counsel for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, CMS, the second largest school district in North Carolina, starting in 2001. In 2006, he was named its chief operating officer and later moved into the role of deputy superintendent. I'm sorry, Mo, I'm gonna have to do this. In 2008, he became a superintendent for Guilford County Schools, GCS, the 3rd largest district in North Carolina. It really helps to give context to who he is and all that he's done before he became our okay, he gave me the side eye, but I'm going to do it anyway. The 3rd largest district in North Carolina. During his more than 7 years of leadership, he was widely recognized for his innovative approach to education and impactful reforms. Under his guidance, the district achieved significant improvements in academic performance, increased graduation rates, and prioritized character development, earning both state and national acclaim for these successes. After leaving GCS, Guilford County Schools, Green served as the executive director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, an influential North Carolina foundation that supports various causes, including public education from 2016 to 2023. During his tenure, he led a strategic assessment and planning process that resulted in All4NC, a framework for grant making and learning that centers efforts to strengthen democracy, advance public education, foster a healthy and sustainable environment, and promote social and economic justice. Green has served on numerous boards focused on educational issues, including homelessness, athletics, policy, media, arts, and community support. He is a double Duke University graduate with a bachelor's degree in political science and economics and a law degree. Green is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and Sigma Pi Phi, the Boulay fraternity. He is married and has 2 adult children, both of whom graduated from North Carolina Public Schools. I give you Maurice Mo Green.
Well, good evening. Oh, come on, team. Good evening. Good evening. Certainly my honor and pleasure to be here this evening as I talk with you tonight about fulfilling the promise what are our obligations? Fulfilling the promise, what are our obligations? Tonight I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about a number of things. Certainly going to spend some time talking about the North Carolina Constitutional Convention of 1868. I want to talk about the current North Carolina Constitution. I want to hit you with some fast facts, and then the role of North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction and the department, the vision that we have, and the pillars. And then I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions that you may have. But I want to set the frame for this promise of education in our state. And the way that I want to set it is the following. If you could walk with me to the education building in Raleigh and climb the stairs to the second floor, and as you walk into the area that is the place for the offices of the North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction, you'll see the seal of North Carolina. You'll see flags of the United States and North Carolina. And if you turn to the left and look sort of behind you once you walk into that space, there will be on the wall the following. There is a plaque, if you will, that outlines this office of North Carolina State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the various duties that are set forth in laws in our state. And then there is the list of all of the prior state superintendents, going back to even before 1868. And then there are pictures of each of the individuals who have held that office. There are about 25 pictures. And there are about 5 in a row, and it goes down about 5 rows. And for the first several rows, then, all white males. You get to the bottom row, and for the first time you see white females. But nowhere do you see anything of a person of color in any of those pictures. And so I was struck with the importance of this office and recognizing how for over 150 years there's never been a person of color to hold this position. And so I'm sitting or standing and looking at it and thinking, what am I about to take on? And has there ever been anyone before me doing what I am about to do? Who do I call on when I need to think about how do we move education in North Carolina forward? Is there anyone who has envisioned what it could be like to be in this role? What would it mean to educate all of the children of North Carolina, not just those who might be white? And so I remembered that while there's not been anyone in this role, there were folks who came before me who dreamt a dream that we could in fact educate all in our state. And that dream included African Americans. For you see, after the Civil War, the North Carolina Constitution established this general and uniform public schools. And the 1868 North Carolina Constitution required that the General Assembly provide a general and uniform system of public schools wherein tuition shall be free of charge to all of the children in this state. Now, this was in 1868, so who would come up with such language? One might imagine. This again was right after the Civil War. Who would come up with this? Well, as it turns out, there was the convention that occurred in the early part of 1968. There were delegates who were voted to attend this convention from all across North Carolina, and the delegates included 13 blacks. For those who would be interested in partisan politics, I'll just say that the 13 blacks were Republicans. But the 13 blacks went about, and these were some freed blacks before the Civil War, freedmen, and there were formerly enslaved individuals. And so can you imagine walking into a body in Raleigh and saying, among other things, how about we educate all of our children, including African American children? Wow. And so it's given me great peace, if you will, to know that while I know that there was a lot going on, that there were folks who came before that said, but we can do something magnificent if we decide to educate all children. Among the list is Bishop James Walker Hood, who some of you might know was a bishop in the Amy Zion Church, who was designated when these schools were established to be the assistant superintendent for the Negro schools. So while we were going to educate all of our children, we weren't going to do it together. That took a long time. And in fact, the language that you see here, there was language that really tried to take away some of these tenets. Only but a few years later. But the language that now exists in the North Carolina Constitution essentially follows some of that same language from 1968, where the delegates who were brought to Raleigh said, we can do this for all children, and then put it out to the people of North Carolina who approved the Constitution in 1968. And so then we come up to now 30 plus years ago. Many of you are familiar with the Leandro litigation, I'm sure, where the case of Leandro, which was brought by several districts really looking for increased funding for public schools, we're still at it 30 years later, but the North Carolina Supreme Court essentially said that there is a definition behind this concept that's in our Constitution, and it's called a sound basic education, and that every child is entitled to this sound basic education, if you will. So that is then the backdrop that I want to give you as I now talk about the promise. For that promise is for us to provide a sound basic education for every child who comes into our public schools. That is our obligation. So who are in our public schools then? So we have 1.5 plus million students in North Carolina public schools presently. We have 115 public school districts. So there are 100 counties in North Carolina, so there are some counties that have more than one. There are over 2,500 schools in those districts. There are also now over 200 public charter schools in North Carolina. The state demographics for our students would be essentially about half now of our students would be white. A little less than that, about a quarter, a little less than a quarter would be black. A rising Latino Hispanic population now over 20%, and then others make up the difference. So a very diverse school system. There are other schools that are also served by, in our North Carolina system, to include lab schools, and then there are also 3 residential schools as well. So, what I thought I would do as part of these fast facts is just give you a sense of, and I could go lots of different directions. I just want to hit you very quickly with sort of where we are in North Carolina with regards to academic achievement and then with regards to funding, if you will. So you can see on this chart, if you're looking at graduation rates, essentially in the blue would be North Carolina. And so you can see North Carolina has essentially been in the low to mid 80s and now basically at 87% of our students graduating. And it's called a 4-year cohort graduation rate. So you start in the 9th grade, how many individuals are graduating essentially 4 years later? More complicated than that, but that gives you hopefully the sense. You can see then that North Carolina for many years in this last decade has been higher than the nation. The nation is catching up to us, if you will. Now, if you then look at race and ethnicity for North Carolina, and we'll look at the late 2021-22, and I pull that out because that's the last year where we've got national data as well. You can see that our ratios are essentially the same for us and the nation. You can also see that there's a little bit of variance, if you will, between white and black, where white's at about 90%, black is at 83%. You can see where Hispanic Latino is, you can see where Asian Pacific Islander, and then where American Indian are as well. Essentially, we are equal to or slightly better than the nation on almost each one of those particular demographics. So that gives you a sense of graduation rate. I would actually say if you look over the last 10 plus years, steady, good progress, particularly for students of color in North Carolina. Now, if we then look at ACT, which is an examination that, so North Carolina is one of about 14, 15 states in the country where essentially every student takes the ACT in North Carolina in the 11th grade. That's done. So it's a good way of just sort of saying, well, how do we measure up, at least with the other states that take the ACT? And you'll see then that while we're graduating at an exceedingly high level, if you know about the ACT where you can score up to a 36 and UNC requires entry of a 19 on ACT, you can see then there's lots of work yet to be done. And you can see a pretty dramatic difference between certain of our demographics. Again, if you compare us to the nation, essentially the same. So we can say we're in the same boat as much of the rest of the nation, but that's not really great news. There is a lot of work to be done. You look at, for example, African Americans, or blacks, if you will, at 16.6. And again, if the UNC cutoff is at 19, you know that there are many, many students that are well below that number. I want to shift gears. Again, I could talk about any number of things. I could have, for example, lifted up things like end of grade and end of course examinations, where you will see a significant gap between white students and African American or black students as well, just as you saw with the ACT. I want to shift gears though and talk a little bit about funding, if you will. Per pupil funding by source. And this is year 2021. This is the latest year that we have where we can also look at national data as well. And so you can see where North Carolina finds itself compared to the national numbers. North Carolina at $11,592 on average. The national average almost $17,500. You can see where the breakdown is by state and federal and local as well. So pretty dramatic difference between us and the nation with regards to what we are putting into our system in public education in North Carolina. There's a report that comes out from the Education Law Center. They call it Making the Grade, and each year they basically update the report and basically provide a few different ways of looking at the data with regards to funding. The first one is with regards to funding level. So what is the amount, if you will, that various states are putting into their educational systems. And so you can see at the funding level, and again, these numbers are going to be slightly different because you're looking at different years and different ways of sort of looking at the data. But you can see what the Education Law Center does is also adjust for regional differences, does not include federal funding, and they exclude some other things like capital outlays as well. But you can see that North Carolina is still almost $4,800 less than the national average. And we rank, compared to the rest of the country, in 48th position. Next would be funding distribution. So this is, are we distributing our money in a way that tries to provide more resources to students who might be concentrated in more lower income districts. And here, yes, we are doing, compared to the rest of the nation, a reasonably good job. In fact, the Education Law Center gives us a grade of a B for this effort. But then you get to funding effort, because it's great that we are perhaps distributing the money, but we're not having a whole lot of money compared to the national average. And then you would say, well, but maybe we don't have the money. That might be a reason for us then to have these lower numbers. Not the case. Not the case. So if you look at how much is dedicated of the North Carolina's state gross domestic product, it's a little over 2% supports our public education system, K-12. When you compare North Carolina to the rest of the nation, we're in 49th position. Now in 2023, we're actually at the bottom. So I suppose one could say, well, we're headed in the right direction. Arizona, I believe, is now below us. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's right. but we're at 49th position, if you will. So we have the ability. We're not putting it into our education system. So before I open it up, and I'll answer questions, I'll take questions, but before I open it up for questions, I did want to just set a little bit of a frame of who you're talking with and what then is my responsibility. How do I answer the call then in fulfilling the promise and fulfilling this and meeting the obligations? First of all, what is this position? Because one thing that I learned throughout this process is folks would go, Mo, what are you running for again? And folks would go, you're a superintendent of public, yeah, and I got all sorts of things. But just so you know, and this again traces its back to 1868, actually, a lot of this. It's an elected position. It's responsible for the management of the K-12 public education system. So I like to think of this like, and you can see the words, but I think of it in two ways. This is a position that is the chief administrative officer for public schools. So runs the day-to-day operations, oversees the public school system in North Carolina, works in conjunction with the State Board of Education in doing that. And then the other thing that I would say that this position does, it's the chief advocacy officer for public schools for the state of North Carolina. If no one else is going to stand up for public schools, it's my belief that this position is called upon to say, these are the things that our public schools need. It's a member of the Council of State, and so you'll see here the things that the position does. I won't bore you with reading all of that. You can get a sense of the magnitude of the position. Administers over $11 billion annually, provides licenses for 100,000 educators in our state. Helps develop the standard course of study and works in conjunction with the state board in doing so. So then you get to the vision that we have for this position and for me. As was mentioned with my bio, it is achieving educational excellence, which is, I believe, the successful coupling of academic achievement and character development with a focus on excellence. And so you hear a few different things. First of all, you hear academic achievement, you hear character development. We utilize a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. And then you'll combine it with a focus then on excellence. It is my belief that notwithstanding what our funding might be, notwithstanding where we are, in comparison to perhaps other states on various educational metrics. We have the ability, I believe, to be the very best public school system in the state of North Carolina. And so that is the charge. Stick with me. I don't want us to be the second best. The charge is for us to be the very best. And so then the question becomes, how do we get there? There are 6 pillars for which we're going to build on. Certainly preparing each and every child for whatever's next for them. And so for me, that means the following. We cannot be the individuals or the system that blocks whatever our children want to do beyond their K-12 education. And so what that's going to mean is we're going to be calling on us as adults to be sure that our children get the opportunity to take and pass a college level course while still in high school, while at the same time taking and passing a career and technical education course or 2 or more while still in high school as well. They will then decide what is next for them. It certainly includes investing fully in public education. This is going to be, and someone earlier said, Mo, do you realize they're going to be cutting your budget? When you have the conversations with the General Assembly. I don't go into it with the idea that they will cut the budget. I'm not naive. I know what has transpired. Individuals, and I say, we can invest fully in public education. So then it's incumbent on me, and I would submit to you, all of us, for us to figure out how do we get the General Assembly to come around and invest fully in public education. And this language of investing fully is not solely about the General Assembly. It's about every other mechanism one can call upon for us to invest fully in our children and their educational system. We will revere our public school educators, and I use those words intentionally. Educators certainly includes our teachers and school administrators, but it's our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers, our custodians, all are educators. And then the word revere, revere. It is the best word I can come up with. This is higher than respect. This is a noble profession, this idea, this concept of educating. And so we have to be sure that we raise up the level of what we think about for our educators. There'll be multiple and varied ways that we can revere educators, and we'll explore what those will look like during my tenure. We certainly have to enhance parent and community engagement in this work. So I put up the slides to say, what is my role? But as a person who was a former mayor of Greensboro, who would say, when I was superintendent, if your mind isn't always thinking about the education of our children, your mind is wandering. And so the question is, how are we going to engage all of us? Public school system is not this entity that sits by itself. We are the public. This is our system. What are we going to do to be sure that it's the best system in the country? So we have to engage our parents and community in this work. We certainly have to provide safe and secure learning environments. And that includes certain physical safety, but it also includes emotional and mental safety as well. And then finally, the last pillar is one that I want to spend just a moment on, and that is we're going to celebrate the good in public education. We're going to celebrate the good. There are lots of folks who are out here saying all sorts of negative things about public education, leading the voices to why there needs to be multiple and varied choices. And I'm not opposed to choice. I don't want you to ever hear that coming from me. I'm not opposed to it. Love it. What you do with public dollars, however, the choice ought to be public schools. And then the choices that we are able to provide ought to be great ones. There are each and every day, even with the metrics that I've shared with you, good things going on in our public schools. It would be very easy to look at some of those metrics and say, well, Mo, ain't much good going on. You looked at the ACT scores, did you not? And you saw where, for example, African Americans ain't much good going on. What I would say back to you is the following. There is. Every day, educators are doing a lot of good. The way that I operate is, and I want to call on each of us to do the same, is to say, good job. Now, let's do better. Good job. Now let's do better. Where does that come from as I wrap up my comments and open it up for questions? It comes from my mother. Special education teacher who would work with students and before she was a special education teacher, she went back to school to become a special education teacher, I have to tell you. So my brother and I, we were her students. And so what she would say is, good job, you can do better. We're going to celebrate this, but you can do better. And so that then is what we're calling on. I am calling on each of you as we celebrate Black history, which is history, as Mr. Williams said, and the mayor said. It's American history. What are we going to do to be sure that the next chapter of American history is one that we will be proud of, because we will finally live up to the promise of educating each and every one of our children in our public schools to the highest levels possible? What will we do? With that then, I'm happy to go anywhere you want to go with questions.
So, can I take the one stab first? You know, you mentioned the money piece and what might happen or might be attempted, but is there any indication that the legislature might be attempting to circumscribe your power as they did with some others?
Yes, so, and I'm assuming people can hear the question, so yes. So, in fact, before I even started, the General Assembly came back into session towards the end of last year, and in fact, did take some authority away from the state superintendent position. And so the authority that they took away was related to charter schools and the charter school, the review, the ability to appeal decisions of the Charter School Review Board. Does that then set the, so, I mean, I hadn't even taken office. Does that tell you where they might be headed? I don't know. But that gives you some sense of what they've already attempted to do.
The question I pose to you is, what actually is going on with all that money that's coming from the North Carolina lottery that's supposed to be for education? Where is all that money?
Yeah, so great question. So the way that the lottery operates, and the MUNS, and it's called the Education Lottery, when the law was first put into place, the law was put into place without a particular provision that becomes critically important to what I'm about to say about where the money goes. You could have put into the law something that says this money is intended to be supplement to what's already money provided to public schools. So that if you had $10 and the lottery gave you another $2, you now have $12. That would be supplement. That provision was not put in there. So you can actually have money that goes into the lottery that basically can supplant the money that the General Assembly would provide for public education. So folks can always say, well, there's more money. But that doesn't mean that it actually is more money, because the lottery puts out all kinds of wonderful information, hundreds of millions of dollars, but is it really supplementing what the General Assembly is putting into public education? So the money goes in, but then can come out, and you end up with a similar pot of money ultimately going to public education.
Maurice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have two questions, and I loved your vision. And I work with students, so I'm wondering where in this process student voice comes into play, right, around what students need. And then my second question is, what does family and community engagement look like, and are you talking with families that are the most vulnerable and marginalized to get their input?
Great, thank you. So the way that this, and I should have mentioned this, thank you, because I forgot to say one thing. What you have now is a vision and some pillars. But the way that I operate is to ultimately do a strategic plan. And so to get from that vision to a plan is listening and learning. It's called Mo Wants to Know. This is the third time that I'm doing it. I did it when I was superintendent of Guilford County Schools, and did it when I was at Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation as well. And so we'll engage parents and community in sharing what it is that you want to see for our public school system. But it's going to, I've sort of laid out, I'm not settling for second best. So if your vision isn't going to be the best, then it's likely not going to end up in the strategic plan. You can go online even now, and people and answer, what do you want for our public school system? We'll be going across the state of North Carolina and doing listening and learning tour conversations with individuals across the state. We will engage whoever wants to engage, and it would certainly be my intention to engage those at all ends of whatever spectrum you might come up with. We'll also engage students. So there is currently well, let me just say, one of the things that I did when I was superintendent of Guilford County Schools is I established a Students Advisory Council. And we dealt with challenging issues, right? I came in right when the budget when the Great Recession hit in 2008. That's when I became superintendent. I went to our students and said, what should we cut? Here are our budgets. We had our chief financial officer and other come in and explain various things, but I said, what should we cut? That's the kind of engagement that I'll have with students now across the state as well. So there will absolutely be student voice, both in the development of the strategic plan and then ongoing as we go about implementing it. The implementation of our strategic plan will include lots of various folks who will provide support, input that will lead us, because what we'll do is have a plan with various initiatives, goals, deadlines, and that will require lots of folks' involvement in this work as well. One of the things I should tell you as part of the reorganization that we've done for the Department of Public Instruction is nothing against who was my predecessor. Every leader has their own way of organizing a department, and I have my own. One of the things that we did, without boring you with all of the details, is we decided, in addition to establishing there's one deputy, there's 6 chiefs, we established a position for engagement of community and stakeholders. So that we wanted to be abundantly clear that if we're going to do this work and do it well, we want to dedicate a full position, and ultimately will be folks that will work in that, it will ultimately be a department of folks that will work on the community engagement piece as well.
Actually, my question was about the funding along the line of the North Carolina lottery. And I wanted to ask, because when you showed the
the funding rates nationally and by state, whether that included the lottery, since North Carolina only very recently started having the lottery funding education.
Right.
And also to ask whether the data about the pipeline through to prison and the age grade and all of that, how much of that is real and how much of that was just, I don't know, a lot of what's being told to us as the public who are not in education, and what would be done to stop that pipeline so that our kids are not overrepresented in, well, when they grow up, they're not overrepresented in prison.
Great. So because I'm not sure I understood what your question is about the lottery. So if I come back to...
It was included in the funding gap between the national funding and state funding. And by the way, I think it was awesome that with the funding being less, we're still pretty much on par nationally, even though the funding is less.
Yeah, so what could we do in North Carolina with more money? Yeah, so, I mean, this is part of the message, right? Here we are doing reasonably, well, we're doing about what the rest of the country is doing. Meanwhile, we're underfunding public education. So this is where I say our educators are doing remarkable work with limited resources. What would happen if we used the money? Now, we could use it and be wasteful, right? Or we can use it in ways that will actually dramatically increase outcomes. And it's my belief that with the right kind of structures, people in place, we could actually, with increased resources, do magnificent things for children. The lottery, so there are pieces of the lottery that are included in that number, and then there are pieces that are not included in that number. It sort of depends on, for example, when the making the grade, where they take out capital outlay. There's part of lottery dollars goes for capital outlay, goes for construction of facilities, schools. So that would not be included in some of those numbers. Your question about, gosh, what was your other half? School to prison pipeline, yes. So this is what's been shared with me for many years, is that prison administrators and those in that fund prisons actually make decisions about how many beds they think they need based on the number of students who are not performing on grade level in a third or fourth grade. And so, I have and I may not have that exactly right, but that's the essence of what they have relayed to me. I have no reason to dispute that. I've not ever gone deep behind that information to explore it at a deep level, but I can't imagine why someone would just make that up. Right? So what that does mean then is if we don't disrupt what is happening, then there will be homes for folks when they graduate from high school or fail to graduate from high school. That's not good. And so we have to think about this as early as possible. In fact, we need to be thinking about it, I would submit to you, even before they arrive in our public schools in pre-K or kindergarten. We need to be thinking about it at birth or even before birth. What needs to happen for those years, and then certainly into our K-12 system as well. So I can go into more detail, but hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I won't stand up so I can block views. But I did want to ask a question about curriculum and curriculum reform, not dealing with the DEI stuff at all. I'm really talking about test preparation, since you put the ACT information up, and also the homeschooling and private schooling, whatever you call it. But I do know as an educator that people start their kids taking the ACT test in almost in middle school, 9 and 10 years old, and they practice it until they get into 9th, 10th grade, and then they've mastered test taking. In preparation, in the curriculum? Is there room enough for people to redesign the program so that kids in public school can actually have an opportunity to practice those tests without having to pay for them, because you don't have the economic income to pay to take that test 4 or 5 times before you actually have to sit for it to go to college where it actually is going to count?
Yeah.
We need them to have access to have that kind of practice.
Yeah, so thank you. So this is a place where I think there is opportunity. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there are currently dollars available. I mean, I put up the numbers. There are things that I would submit to you that we've got to spend dollars on even before we get to that. But I do think that this is a place where we ought to be thinking about dollars, expansion dollars, being utilized in ways that will prepare our students to take the ACT, so that when they do take it in the 11th grade, this isn't, because most of our students are basically walking in and taking the examination, right? And you know from, you shared some of your experience, it's the students who have had the opportunity to prepare for it in prior grades that can then do much better on the ACT. And so I do think this is an opportunity and a place for us to engage. I also think this is a place for us to engage in a broader community context as well, right? And so whether it turns out to be necessarily public dollars or a place where we say, if this is important, and now there's some question about whether ACT is as important as it used to be, or the SAT, but if we want to still hold our kids accountable for these results, maybe we ought to be engaged in our broader community and providing additional tutoring resources and then test-taking opportunities before the 11th and into the 11th grade as well.
Okay. Well, you do have one. Okay. Got to speak up.
I'm wondering, given the makeup of our current General Assembly, is it helpful for we citizen voters to be in contact with our representatives regarding additional funding for education?
So the short answer to that is yes. I think absolutely. Now, why do I say that? So I say it because I actually think that it requires, so again, many folks will say, well, Mo, go do this, and I will. I will be an advocate. But you heard my voice, right? My voice will resonate with some folk, but maybe not with others. And so other people's voices may resonate with some of the members of the General Assembly. And so I can give, priorities. You'll hear what some of those are. State Board of Education is planning to vote on them this Thursday. And so you'll have some sense of, here are the things that maybe you can advocate for. But I think that having varied voices coming from lots of different sources with different backgrounds can have an impact on our General Assembly. It may not happen overnight. It may not happen overnight, and so sometimes then folks will get disappointed or dejected and think, well, no one's listening. But I think if we can continue to be persistent and come with different ways of saying it, with different backgrounds, then I do think that it can be ultimately effective. And then I'll quote Representative Alma Adams, that sometimes if you don't like the policies, you got to change the policy makers.
Okay.
Superintendent Green, what does your first year look like?
Yeah. So The first half of this first year is doing what I said we would do, which is to set the vision, to do the listening and learning tour, and then set the strategic plan. It was to reorganize the Department of Public Instruction, to lay out how we're going to approach this work. Now, that doesn't mean that in this first half of the year or the rest of the year that we're not about trying to continue to do good things for children, because we are. And so holding folks accountable, understanding that the message that I delivered to the Department of Public Education, Instruction, was this concept of excellence, and we'll be driving that home. People have no idea what excellence really looks like. And so that will be what I will be doing for this first year. The second half of the year, as we go into the next school year, we're going to really, I like to tell folks, we're going to start calling the question. We're going to start calling the question. And so some of that will mean that, to the extent that I am capable of doing so, there will be people that I tell folks all the time, I love you, but maybe this isn't the right role for you. Because our children don't get another chance. They don't get another chance to have an exceptional education. They can't wait on us to get this right. So that's what I'll be doing this first school year. The last thing I'll say is this. Like, for example, I have what's called an entry plan. I put that on our website so folks can see it. You will see our strategic plan once that's developed, what the goals are. And I will hold myself personally accountable for those goals. People have to understand, when I was superintendent of Guilford County Schools, they know we made a lot of amazing gains, but we didn't hit all of the strategic goals. And so I told the Board of Education, I will not take an increase in pay, even though my contract required them to give me every year a 3% increase in my compensation. I wasn't a bad lawyer. I had written into my contract, every year I'm supposed to get that. I would not take it. The same thing will hold true, because then if I hold myself accountable, then I believe then I can hold all of the rest of us accountable for results as well.
So when you we 49 in the country.
Yeah.
I'm mad as hell.
You ought to be.
When did we become 49? I mean, people ought to be upset. I don't care what party you in.
Yes.
In education, we're 49. When did we get to be 49?
Yeah, so
Educate your kids at home, whether you educate them, wherever you educate them, you're still part of 49.
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
You know that whatever party they represent in D.C., they need to put money in education, because we are 49.
Correct. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. So, and so this has been, so North Carolina has been towards the bottom for a while. And as I say, we got to the absolute bottom. Yeah, and so at some point, that's why I say, team, this has got to be all of us. My job, if I've done my job as well as I can do it, part of what I've done is I am trying to be sure people understand the predicament we have put ourselves in, when we don't have to be. It'd be one thing to be 49th, but say, well, we don't have the resources in our state, so I understand. But we have the resources. We're constitutionally obligated to provide a sound basic education. Those two things need to match up.
All right, well, thank you so much. That hopefully you'll give some thought to attending One other that I'll just mention, Justice Anita Earls of the North Carolina Supreme Court has arranged a program to take place at the Supreme Court in Raleigh on, it's February 21st, and wow, I'm seeing that's when y'all have y'all grand, is that when the Drake Building grand opening is?
February 21st.
Yeah, well, that's when this program is going to be at the North Carolina Supreme Court on Black History, and it's going to be lifting up a couple of important, historically speaking, Black lawyers that people just don't know about. I mean, this history is so rich that there's so many people that have done so much and that we don't even know about. So excavating those stories is part of what's going to be happening. So keep that in mind, and I will take a seat, and I don't know if there are other comments that you all have to make, but thank you so much for attending tonight.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Again, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of the town of Carrboro, Carrboro Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Resources for joining us on your Monday evening. You could have been anywhere else, but you joined us, so I thank you so much. I encourage you, as James mentioned, we do have programs and special activities throughout the month, which also can be found in our beautifully designed Carrboro calendar. So please stop by that table over there, pick up a calendar. Also, you can pick up Carrboro Recreation brochure as well that lists all the activities that are being offered through the month. Again, we have activities throughout this week. Tomorrow we have Poets Open Mic via Zoom, so you can go on carrboro.nc.gov to get the link to participate in that. On Wednesday morning from, I believe, at 10 a.m. here at the Century Center, we have Senior Bingo. So come out, win some great prizes. And no money, James. No money, James, but we have some very nice prizes that you can take home that will be useful in your house. And again, I want to thank you all again. Bring a friend, share with everyone as far as the good things that are coming. And as Maurice Green told us, there's still a lot of work to do that we have to do. So again, thank you all. Please, we have refreshments in the back. I don't want to take them home, okay? And also, we have some nice Black History Month swag over there on the table as well. So thank you again, and be safe.